Thank you so much for joining in on a Saturday. Here we have Rene to talk about, we have with outgrowing adoption of low code, no code. We have to know what is essential and why is it needed that we should have a center of excellence in an organization. And Rene, he is a Microsoft MVP and APAC collaboration and productivity tools project manager who would share us his experience on the same. Um, Stage is yours, Rene. Thanks for joining us again.
Okay, great. Thank you. Just to confirm, can you hear me?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, excellent, because that's the most important thing, obviously. And just going to share my screen as well. All right. So my name is Rene Modery. I want to talk about a center of excellence, why you need a Power Apps center of excellence in your organization. Here we go. So very quickly about myself. So I'm a Microsoft MVP since 2012, so 9 years now. Renewal happening again this year. So if all goes well, that will be the 10th award from Microsoft. In my daily life, I work at Group M. We're a media and advertising consulting company or investment company. We have around 40,000 employees worldwide, and in APAC there's around 10 to 12,000. Reason why I'm telling you those numbers is obviously we're very big on the Microsoft platform. We use Office 365 for all our daily things. We've got obviously our mailboxes in the cloud. We use SharePoint, we use Teams. And we use the Power Platform. And that means, with so many employees, surely there are a lot of people who think, I could do something with Power Apps and I'm going to build my own quick app and it looks nice and I'm going to build another one. And suddenly you've got a huge sprawl of apps. So with an organization as large as ours and the growing interest globally, not just within our company, but obviously for everyone, that obviously shows us some I don't want to call it problems, but obviously there's a lot more to manage than in that scenario. And one of my tasks or my responsibilities is actually running our internal center of excellence. We started to set that up. Sorry, I can't remember actually when, forgot that because it's been quite some time, obviously, since we got started and we try to improve things over time, etc. But I'm working on our internal Power Apps COE, so that's why I thought it would be good to actually share my experiences a bit with you, but also just basically get some information out there to explain why you should actually seriously consider setting something up. If you want to connect with me then after the session, because we don't have a lot of time, I'm going to rush through a lot of things and will not be able to go into too much detail in a lot of things. But if you want to reach out to me, feel free to contact me on Twitter @Modery. Connect with me on LinkedIn, always happy to get connected with others and share our knowledge. So feel free to get in touch with me. So what I want to talk about now is actually, first of all, setting the stage. What's a center of excellence and what does it do? We just want to make sure that everybody understands that. And also we're going to talk about what are the benefits of using one, because you don't just set something up and everything's wonderful, but you need to work towards some goals and you want to define what benefits you might actually get out of doing certain activities like preparing for a COE, setting it up, etc., running it. Next, we will also have a look in more detail about what you need to do to set something up. That includes a little bit of a look at the organizational activities, but also mostly around the technical aspects then. And towards the end, I'll quickly share some resources as well. I'll just drop them in the chat, but those will be mostly covered by what we're going to talk about in the next 20-25 minutes. So why do you need a center of excellence? When you think about the situation in your own organization, or if you're working for a consulting company, then for the companies that you are working for and that you are basically advising, there are probably a couple of questions that might come to your mind, and you think about how many Power Apps do we actually have? Do you know that? Are you in charge of a certain area maybe within the company? And that's why I need to know, how many apps do we actually have? Is it 10, 50, 2,000? You might not know right now, but it might be important to know, or it should be important to know, because those apps, if somebody develops an app, they're not just doing it for fun because they're bored at work, but rather people are trying to achieve something. And those apps might be something relatively small to get started with, but might actually grow quite, well, relatively big and important and get used quite widely. That brings me also to the next step. Do you know who are the app makers in your organization? Maybe a colleague sitting next to you says, yeah, I developed an app. You might say, hey, that's wonderful. But do you know about that other guy sitting in Malaysia or sitting in the US or in Germany or somewhere else? And he's developed already 30 apps. That's also one important thing. So you don't just want to know about all the apps around, but you also want to make who's actually developing apps and how actively, because you also want to ideally support those people. You don't just want them to do their thing on their own, but rather help them with what they are doing right now, help them basically get better as well. That also brings me to the next point. You want to ensure that when people are doing things that they're doing it the right way, because obviously with Power Apps it's quite easy. You just go to make.powerapps.com, you start building your own app and you do stuff, etc., without following, well, any potential corporate guidelines. And we're not saying, oh, there are a lot of restrictions in place and you should put a lot of restrictions in place, but rather obviously want to make sure that, hey, when people do things, they, well, do it properly. Like, do they plan about, hey, where's my data stored? What happens if, again, if it's, for example, in a SharePoint site, what happens if the SharePoint site gets deleted and my app stops working or so? Think about those kind of things, naming standards, life cycle management, all those kind of things that when you've got any kind of application, you think about it. Even for Power Apps, that's actually required then. Furthermore, when you've got some awesome apps running in your organization, a lot of people are using them, you also want to actually promote them. So you want to make sure that, hey, there's an app, 20 people started using it last week, maybe 50 people this week. Why not promote it even further? So make sure that something nice is available to more colleagues, or other people could look at it and say, hey, that's actually a great idea. I have a similar use case. Maybe with some changes, I could also adapt that app to my own needs. So make sure that there is that idea of what's actually happening around Power Apps in the organization. And the last thing, again, governance processes. I've mentioned that already as well. So make sure that governance processes are followed so that people don't blindly create 100 apps. And when that person leaves, you've got 100 apps with no owner. And yeah, you don't know anything about how they were set up, what they were doing, etc. And it might be, or might have become a critical app. Important to think about those things. So what's now the Power Apps COE for? There are a few options here. It could be a community for you and your colleagues so that you can basically share your knowledge and experience. A platform where you could get together, talk about apps, talk about standards, etc., and exchange ideas. It could be a set of tools that help you to manage and govern your Power Apps and the whole platform much better so that you as a, so to say, administrator know what's happening, can make sure that you know how many apps there are, how many app makers there are, etc., etc. It could also be a central repository, again, to share, again, a set of common best practices, to share governance guidance, to share training materials, etc. But obviously what I'm trying to talk about, and you might get the idea, yeah, it's actually all of the above. So a center of excellence is not just a technical solution you put in place and everything's awesome. It's also not just a, I don't know, a guidance document, a governance document that you create once and then, yeah, you say, look at that, and everybody should look at it and everything's going to be awesome. No, it's all of that actually, and potentially also a bit more, but this is what we are going to focus on. So what do you plan to do with a Power Apps COE? First of all, you want to, as mentioned, you want to get greater visibility into your Power Platform environments. So you want to see how many apps are there, how many environments do we actually have, so the technical environment that we can have within the Power Platform. How many app makers are there, potentially how many flows, etc., etc. You want to get an idea of all those things. How many apps are there that haven't been used in, I don't know, 6 months, in a year's time or so? How many test apps that we could actually remove? That's what you might want to actually figure out. Next, you also want to support your colleagues, again, in their development efforts. I mentioned you should encourage people to leverage the Power Platform. And yeah, if they are looking for some guidance, for some training, if they've got some questions, you want to provide them with a platform where they can actually get together, talk about what they are doing, what they've done, guide each other, share experience, and all that kind of stuff. And that also brings me again to the governance process, because you want to make sure that when people create apps that they follow certain rules. So when you create an app, obviously, chances are that it's quite easy to get started with it, etc. But you still want to make sure that people think about, for example, again, permissions management, that this is done correctly. Where's my data stored? Do I have to worry about backups, etc.? All those kind of things. So you might want to basically share those governance processes and further standards. And overall, obviously, the idea is that with all that you're doing here, you're getting greater value out of the Power Platform. Because, I mean, one of the worst things you could do is just say, yeah, we've got the Power Platform, we use Office 365, so people can use it if they want, and they might be doing things, and yeah, we just let them be. Obviously, that's not very efficient. You don't want to restrict people from doing things, you want to support them, and by supporting them, by encouraging them, by providing them with further information, etc., in the long run, you will get much more value out of it than if you just tell them, yeah, there's something and you're on your own now. You want to basically improve how the Power Platform is leveraged and used within your organization. So how are others actually doing it right now? So one example, that's a Microsoft customer success story, and there's a link that I'll share later for that. One of those examples is the French Railways, Société Nationale de Chemin de Fer Français, quite a long term, short SNCF. So they've been starting to use the Power Platform internally, and they realized, oh, there's a lot of good use cases, and there's a lot of technical expertise that they can build up. So they were actually not just blindly, working on things, but rather trying to organize it. So they set up a team. They provided coaching within the company. They made sure that, hey, if there are some great apps that I use, for example, some maintenance apps that helps to reduce the time it takes to, again, maintain trains or other parts of trains, etc., by a certain amount. They basically make sure that all that is visible. They also then make sure that there's that improved operational effectiveness, so that people who got trained, they know better how to do things. They know what kind of, again, technical guidance they need to follow, etc., and making sure that whatever they're doing in the Power Platform, there are people supporting each other, there's guidance, there's clear guidance, there's a lot of information. So if somebody wants to get started, they can easily do so. If they need help, there's a lot of help that can be found. If they're looking for use cases, there are use cases, etc. And I just took a couple of screenshots here from the Microsoft success story. Again, have a look at it as well. There's a lot more that can be found out in that article. So now I was talking a lot about why you should actually do it. We also want to figure out how it's actually working and how you can do it. So there's, as mentioned earlier, there are two things. First of all, you need to think about your organizational setup, processes, etc. Ideally, you can provide some resources to work on this, because again, you're not just having some IT admin deploying the technical solution, but rather you want to make sure that what you're doing gets communicated regularly. So you might think about some person doing the comms. You need to think about somebody who's engaging your app makers, your Power Platform community, your Power Addicts, your Power Champions, whatever you want to call them. You need basically somebody who is a bit of a community manager. You need somebody who can review, for example, your apps, make sure, yeah, apps that get developed, that are getting used, they're following our governance processes. You need to think about, yeah, planning those governance processes. How do we handle lifecycle management? How do we handle basically app creation? What happens when a new app gets created? Do we automatically inform the app maker about, hey, here are further resources, or we just let him blindly be? All those kind of things. That's one part. And the other part is then obviously looking at some technical setup to help you with all that. So there are many ways how you could approach it. You can say, yeah, I want to figure out all my apps, so I'm going to run a daily PowerShell script or so, etc. But the good news is obviously, and that's what hopefully some of you know and what I want to talk about, is Microsoft has provided a Power Platform Center of Excellence technical solution that you can relatively easily deploy, that gets actively still developed and improved by Microsoft, and that you can basically use to see what's happening in your environment, and then again, work on governance, work on trainings, etc., all the things I just mentioned. So how does that look like? I'm not going to show you right now actually the different apps, etc., just to give you the big architecture point of view. So this was done by Nicholas Kerman on LinkedIn. Again, I'm going to share the link to this resource later with you as well. This is basically the overall COE. There are multiple components in here. And again, you don't need to use all of those components. Depending on company size, you might have different priorities. You might say, hey, we've got 200 people. Archiving is not important to us, but we want to see all the apps that are around, for example. We don't need training because with 200 people, we can handle training quite easily separately, etc. So you see, there's a lot in here. Some of them is actually, the core components are required, but governance, nurture, for example, those are things that you can actually look at and consider. Do they make sense? Can I use them, etc.? And again, all of that is part of multiple solutions that you can then deploy to your own Office 365 tenant and start configuring it and using it. And as mentioned here at the top of that slide, there's also more to think about because while the COE provides you with a lot of things, again, it's not to be meant to be the one perfect solution that does everything for you. You need to think about more again. So once you've got more people using the Power Platform, you think about the user support, makers management, how you can, again, encourage them to share knowledge, etc. And I mentioned setting up a community. So you could, for example, set up a Teams-based community or a Yammer-based community or something like that, whatever you're basically using in your organization, and work on that. Now, just going into a bit more detail in some of those components quickly before I'm going to show you those, how they actually look like. For the core apps, there's one important thing that's here on the right side, which is the Power Platform admin view. So you as a Power Platform admin, that's where you go in and that's where you learn all about what kind of, again, makers, connectors, apps, and flows are around. So you've got a daily job running, a daily flow running that creates that inventory, that checks out any new apps and new makers, connectors, flows, puts that into a database, and then you could basically look at it here from that Power Platform admin view. This is a model-driven app powered by CDS, and you can basically easily then start using this and looking at your whole environment, what's happening there. I mentioned earlier also, for example, you want to put in some governance processes in place. One of those that is provided through the COE is the compliance detail request. So you can define a certain set of criteria, and once an app fulfills that criteria, an email gets sent to the app maker and asks them for further information. So the criteria, for example, in our own organization is, yes, if the app is shared with the whole tenant, we want to know what that app is about, because, share it with 40,000 people, yes, we want to know what is that app actually doing. Or if you share it with at least one security group, then we think, yes, that app gets actively used. Tell us more about it. Those kind of things, basically, in the compliance detail request, again, asks you about, what's the purpose of that app? What kind of business justification is there? What other resources are involved, etc., etc. So a couple of things here. Another thing, again, the nurture part here is importantly the app catalog. So what we have here is then, again, I mentioned earlier, you want to promote relevant and useful apps. And the idea for the app catalog is then, once you've got a certain set of apps that you think are really interesting, really useful, so you've got a central location where you can promote them. So really somebody can go into the app catalog and look at all the, valuable, important, relevant, exciting apps that are around. This obviously does not then usually include all the apps. You say, your test app and your I'm going to try something out app or so, they're not going to go in there. But your hiring approval app, your leave approval app, your whatever other app that gets widely used, you might want to put it in there so people can find out about it. And for example, if another country comes in and says, we want to see your leave approval looks interesting, we also want to apply that. That app could be reused, it could be upgraded, could be copied, etc. The idea is then make it visible actually what kind of awesome things are happening. And you also see here nurture, you see a welcome email and a newsletter. So there's something happening that, or you can actually do something here with further guidance to people. How does the technical side now look like once it's deployed? That's now an extract from our company's Power Platform dashboard. So you can see, for example, we've got active environments. Yeah, there's a couple of them. I think we've got around 80, and we can see here, when you look at those charts, our main default environment has more than 1,200 apps, and you can see more than 5,000 flows. So it's really the very big default environment. Everybody goes in there, does stuff. We've also got a range of other environments for different purposes. Again, we get an idea how many environments there are. We also see here who are active makers. So on the left, we've got the Power Apps makers. On the right, we've got the Flow makers. So those are the ones who actually then created something. And we can see, for example, hey, on the left side, we've got a couple of people who created more than 20 apps each. So those are, for example, the people you want to engage with regularly, find out what are they doing, do they need help, do they want to help you, all those kind of things. So that's a good starting point. Next, you can also then look at all that information that is collected in more detail. So you want to see how many active environments do you have? I mentioned in our organization, we've got a lot of them. You can see here, there's a lot. We've got the main environment with the 1,200 apps, etc. But we've got all the other smaller ones. So sometimes you want to figure out, hey, there was a new environment created. Who created it, for example? Oh, a test environment. There are 3 apps inside, etc., etc. So again, something for you to help you with managing it properly, because you don't want environment after environment after environment after environment. You want to make sure that, yes, ideally each environment has a dedicated purpose. Easier said than done, but if you don't do anything, obviously, then you're not getting anywhere. Very important then. The other thing is, obviously, you want to see all your apps, and that's again where you can come in and by default look at all the apps that are available. As you've seen in our organization, we've got 1,400, 1,500, quite a lot of them. So in here, I can easily see when were they created, when were they modified, what app type is it? Is it a Canvas app? Is it a SharePoint form app as part of a SharePoint list? Is it a model-driven app? Is it a portal app? That's what I can find out. I can see who the owner is, the environment, plus a lot more actually. As mentioned, we've got that governance process. We're asking people for further information once the app gets widely used. So we can then see things like business justification, etc. That brings me, for example, to this example. mHire is a hiring approval app that we are using internally in Asia Pacific. So new hires, what you're going to do is you want to hire someone, basically HR submits that request, has to go through different approvals. Once all approved, then that person can get hired, simply said. All done in Power Apps. And as you can see, basically this has been shared with the whole company. But the idea is then, yes, we've got a lot of people, for example, within Asia Pacific, within HR, who are using it. It's a high visibility app within HR, and while not everybody is allowed to use it, obviously within the organization, the idea is also to grow it a bit further and get more people on board also, then to increase the functionality. But how do we know all that? I was involved in the development of that, managing that project, but if I want to find out more about it without knowing anything about it, I would have to figure out, okay, who's the app owner that I can see here, can talk to him. But ideally, we want to get that information already. And that's what I mentioned earlier with that compliance detail request. Information gets sent to the app owner every Monday, for example, where he gets asked, hey, can you provide more information? And that's where we got that step, validate maker business requirements. Once they submitted requirements, me as an admin, I can come in and say, okay, I'm going to check whether whatever the app owner has submitted is good. For example, we're asking about, what you see here, the app description and other things, which I'll show you in a second. I can assess the risk. How important is that app? Oh, hiring approval, APEC level should be quite important. And then I can highlight it in our app catalog, because obviously I want to make sure, hey, it's a really good app. It's a lot of effort was put into it. It's working quite well. I want to make sure that people know about it, and not just within HR, but ideally, for example, if other regions are interested, for example, they could now say, hey, we want to learn more about it and potentially use it as well. And I mentioned, for example, we're asking now about some app details. Here you can see some of things. So again, business justification, what is it used for? Why are we using that app? What's the purpose of that app? What dependencies are there? So we know, for example, any data in the app, for example, gets stored in this case in a SharePoint site. We know, okay, there's a site that's also relevant for the whole hiring purpose. Need to make sure that if we want to do anything with the app, this is the data that's to be considered. How do we manage access? How do we grant people access to the app? Who has access to the app, etc. That's all provided here through our questionnaire, and that allows us as admins to review what is happening. Also, again, to estimate the business impact. Is it a low-risk app? Like, yeah, somebody's just doing some, I don't know, some, yeah, let's call it a fun app for a team building exercise or so, low risk. This is an important app that we have here right now, but it's not critical. Critical would be, again, oh, if the app fails tomorrow, business stops, we lose money. Not going to be the case here, but it's still quite important. So those are the things that we are asking for, and that will help us then to make a better decision about, do we need to take further action on certain apps, like, oh, this is a key app, maybe you need more support, maybe you need to have a monthly catch-up or so. Without looking at that Power App COE, without getting that information, you might not even know about this business critical or this important app at all. And that's the idea. You find out about this kind of app here through that COE, and then you can basically support the people who are behind this app further. Now, that was a very quick walkthrough, and I can see that Stefano is already in the call. He's going to hold the next session, so I'm not going to try to talk much more. Next steps for you, obviously, all the things I mentioned earlier, you want to basically start preparing. So if you want to set up a COE, you want to establish a team that's not maybe dedicated resources, but people, again, who are helping you with it. Might be ideally, obviously, some people from IT, but maybe you also want to bring on board some, I don't know, some business sponsor, maybe someone right from the comms team or somebody else. Think about your standards, your governance, etc. Do you plan for life cycle management? Do you plan for welcome emails? Do you plan for monthly training, etc., etc.? That's one thing to think about. Plus setting up that community, because you don't want to do things by your own. If there are people who can exchange their knowledge like we are doing here, obviously, you don't just wait for them to talk to each other, but you try to make sure that they can find each other easily, that they can share their knowledge, etc. And lastly, you set up the technical COE. And again, as mentioned, Microsoft guidance is out there. There's a full docs.microsoft.com site, basically, where you can go in, learn more about how to set it up, how to configure it, all those kind of things. Here are now the resources. I'm going to drop them here in the chat in a second. And basically, the main thing is obviously the first one, Power Platform COE. Have a look at it, review it. I only mentioned the Power Apps here, but as seen briefly earlier, for example, you can also monitor your flows here. Plus that big architecture slide I showed, again, that's also in here. The Power Platform resource for architects includes a few other slides or presentation or PDFs. Have a look at that one as well. Okay, for any questions, I'm going to stay around. I think there's not enough time basically to cover it.
Rene, take one question. There is one question in the chat. Yep. You have the time. Go for it.
Okay, great. Yeah. Let me just have a quick look. Yeah. How would we prevent overlap of apps by different creators solving the same problem if so many are being made? And that's exactly what we are trying to achieve, obviously. As mentioned, we've got more than 1,400 apps. We don't know how many of them there are. We don't know what they're doing. Again, there might be 1,000 that are just test apps created a couple of years ago and never updated. But you might actually have 3 different leave approval apps, as an example, doing exactly the same thing. Maybe different stages of complexity right now, but again, how to make sure that this does not happen. And again, you can't easily control it. I mean, you could put in a process to make sure every app that gets created immediately, you ask for business justification, you do a proper review, etc. There's the possibility to run a full project review or app review, but often resources are not available. So as a first step, again, you would create an inventory and then figure out for those apps that are highly used, get an overview of what they are doing. And then you might actually discover, yes, there are those that have a similar purpose. And you might think about the next step of combining them, merging them, etc. So yeah, that's basically one of those ideas or one of those things that you could ideally, hopefully then do via the COE. All right. Any other questions? Then I'm gonna stick around for a couple more minutes, pop them in the chat. Otherwise, I think I'm gonna quickly say thank you for attending.